Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This day in sports history. It's April 2nd, and on this day in back-to-back years, the NCAA instituted two big changes to college basketball. The 1980s was a great decade, at least if you were a kid. It was awesome. MTV came along, everybody had a Walkman, the personal computer, Chicken McNuggets. Well, in 1985 and then again in 1986, the NCAA made two key rules changes to college basketball that gave us the game that we watch religiously now in March. On this day in 1985, the NCAA announced the institution of the shot clock. In the past few weeks, I've talked about some of the stall tactics and games that these featured prominently in. Teams were holding the ball for 3-4 minutes of possession. Well, just yesterday, I talked about how Villanova's Rolly Massimino used that tactic to great success to win the national title in '85. That had to figure a little bit into their decision, but of course, North Carolina's Dean Smith utilized the four corners offense. There's a well-known 1968 ACC tournament game between NC State and Duke when Norm Sloan's Wolfpack held the ball for most of the game with a final score of 12-10. It may have taken the NCAA a while to get to this decision, but now wanting a quicker pace to the game, they announced that a 45-second shot clock was the new law of the land. That has been adjusted over the years, including what it resets to on missed shots rebounded by the shooting team, but now it's a 30-second shot clock. And then in 1986, the NCAA adopted a three-point shot. Now, this was not an easy one to implement. A lot of coaches did not want it, they didn't like it, and this was not a quick decision at all. The NCAA actually experimented with the three-pointer over the course of 5 years in about 20 different conferences around the country. So there were different distances depending on which league was experimenting with it. When it came time to announce the decision, the three-point distance was set at 19 feet 9 inches. That distance was adjusted in 2008 to 20 feet 9 inches, and now it's 22 feet and 3/4 inches. So, with the implementation of the three-point shot, it took a little focus away from the big man, expanded play away from the basket, brought the role of the little guy who could shoot bombs into play. But obviously, there were going to be people who didn't like it, like we've talked about. I mentioned not too many days ago that Indiana's Bobby Knight didn't like it when they adopted it, did not like it through the remainder of his coaching days, and hated it just as much when he retired. There was Dayton's head coach Don Donaher, who felt the adoption of the three was symptomatic of America's sinking into a moral morass, saying, "To me, it's just like a game show now." But now, nearly 30 years after its adoption, I think it's a fair assumption that the three is here to stay. In 1977, This Week in Baseball premiered. I watched a lot of television when I was a kid. One of my favorites on Saturdays was This Week in Baseball, hosted by New York Yankees announcer Mel Allen. Some of the younger generations may be tired of hearing how us Gen Xers only had 4 channels to watch growing up, and one of those was PBS, but this was one of the treats of the week, especially if you are a baseball-playing kid like me. This would be followed up by the NBC Game of the Week, and this is actually credited as being one of the influences on ESPN's SportsCenter, which started in 1979. This Week in Baseball was a highlight show sponsored by Major League Baseball. Commissioner Bowie Kuhn saw that the NFL had NFL Films and was producing its own show, and he figured it would be a great way to promote Major League Baseball. And it worked. The show would, of course, show highlights of games and big plays, great catches, big home runs, and wild antics. but also zero in on players chasing records, have occasional interviews, and of course, Twib notes, and a lot of the great highlights would end with Allen's signature phrase, "How about that?" The show ran in syndication until 1998. It got picked up again by Fox in 2000 and ran until 2011 in varying forms before being shut down for good. Interesting tidbit, the opening theme song for the show was also used on a 1970s game show called Jackpot. And since we're talking baseball for a moment, here are two more baseball stories that happened on this day, starting with the sad and then ending with the bizarre. In 1972, New York Mets manager Gil Hodges died in Palm Beach, Florida. Hodges had just finished playing 27 holes of golf with Mets coaches Rube Walker, Joe Pignatano, and Eddie Yost, and they were walking back to their hotel when he suffered a heart attack and collapsed. Hodges was pronounced dead at a local hospital 20 minutes later. He was just 2 days shy of his 48th birthday, and the Mets were less than 2 weeks away from starting the season. Yogi Berra was named Mets manager 4 days later. The team wore black armbands in tribute and remembrance of Hodges for the duration of the season. And we've already had one Billy Martin spring training story. How about another one? In 1982, Martin was managing the Oakland A's. This time, Martin was not happy about there being no DH rule for spring training games at National League venues. So he sent pitcher Steve McCatty to the plate with a 15-inch long plastic toy bat as a protest. The home plate umpire that day was Jim Quick, who refused to let McCatty stand in with the prop. An argument ensued, but eventually, McCatty stared at 3 strikes with a real bat on his shoulder. And as Mel Allen would say, how about that? And in 2022, it was a classic Tobacco Road matchup between North Carolina and Duke, but this one in the Final Four of the NCAA tournament in New Orleans. This was the first meeting between these two teams in the NCAA tournament, and it was a classic. The Heels were an 8 seed and an underdog. Duke was a 2 seed. Both teams struggled shooting in the first half, with Duke up 3 at the break, and built that up to 7 before the Heels could get their first points of the second half. But a couple Caleb Love threes sparked a 13-0 run, and the Heels were out in front. The Blue Devils fought back, and when Wendell Moore stroked a 3 with 1:24 left, it gave Duke the lead, but it would be their final one of the night. After a couple of free throws, the Heels were up 1 with 25 seconds to play when Love buried a 3 that proved to be the game winner, then hit a pair of free throws in the final seconds to give Carolina the 81-77 win. There were 14 lead changes in the second half, and at no point was the lead larger than 7. Love finished with a game-high 28 points. Duke freshman Paolo Banchero led the Devils with 20 points and 11 rebounds. Trevor Keels had 19 off the bench. It was the final game for Mike Krzyzewski, who announced it was his final year at Duke prior to the start of the season. His record against North Carolina was 50 wins and 48 losses. But those last 2 losses came in Coach K's final goodbye to Cameron Indoor, and on this day, 2 years ago, on the doorstep of the national championship game. In today's non-sports Did You Know? It is estimated that there are about 3 million ships that have sunk and remain on the ocean floor. That's all for now. I'll be serving up more This Day in Sports History tomorrow. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear. starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.